Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to share with you what's on my Nonfiction November TBR, as well as to give you some recommendations for each of our 4 challenges. In case you missed my announcement video, Nonfiction November is a month-long reading initiative that aims to get people excited about reading nonfiction during the month of November. BookTube is a very fiction-dominated space, so we have hosted this for the past 5 years to encourage the community to try picking up some nonfiction so that everyone can see how amazing and not boring it actually is. The goal of Nonfiction November is to read more nonfiction than you ordinarily do. So if you typically read none, then just read 1. If you typically read 1 per month, then try reading 2, and so on and so forth. But we do have 4 one-word challenges in case that's something you want to take on. This year, those 4 challenges are design, sport, true, and voice. These are entirely optional and can be used however you want. You can combine them, you can twist them to make them fit the books you already wanted to read this month, or you can ignore them entirely. The choice is yours. You do not need to read only nonfiction books during November in order to participate in the event. As long as you read at least 1 nonfiction book, or however many you like, you are a part of our event. That being said, since nonfiction is a dominant part of my reading in every other month of the year, I always like to challenge myself during November to read solely nonfiction. This can be something you can emulate if you would like to, but it is certainly not a requirement. So for each of our 4 challenges, I will be telling you what 2 books I will be reading to satisfy that challenge, as well as give you 2 recommendations of books that I really liked that I think fit the prompts really well. So for our first challenge, design, I will be reading Every Tool's a Hammer, Life is What You Make It by Adam Savage. This is the memoir of Adam Savage, former star of the TV show Mythbusters and self-titled maker. He is beloved in the science and tech community for all the amazing things he designs and then builds. I know in this book he's going to talk about his life and his career, but I also know he's going to talk about the process of creation and why he thinks it's important. I actually think I'm going to be reading this with my husband, so hopefully I can twist his arm and get him to join me for a review. My other TBR selection for design is The Tetris Effect, the game that hypnotized the world by Dan Ackerman. This is a history of the video game Tetris, which was designed by a Soviet software engineer back in the 1980s that somehow became an addiction worldwide. Like many other people, I adore Tetris, so I cannot wait to read this history of its creation. My first recommendation for the design challenge is The Feather Thief, Beauty, Obsession, and the Natural History Heist of the Century by Kirk Wallace Johnson. This is a work of true crime, all about a young college student who became interested in the lost art of Victorian fly tying for fly fishing. But he became so obsessed with it that he began having designs on the rare bird specimens housed at the British Museum of Natural History. He did eventually break in and steal irreplaceable carcasses, using many of the feathers for himself, but also making a small fortune selling them to fellow enthusiasts. In the first half, the author tells the story, and then in the second half, the author actually becomes involved in the story, trying to get to the bottom of some of the remaining questions about this very strange heist. This was one of the most popular books of Nonfiction November last year, and now that I've read it, I can totally see why. It is fantastic. And my second recommendation for the design challenge is Triumph of the City, How Our Greatest Invention Makes Us Richer, Smarter, Greener, Happier, and Healthier by Edward Glaser. This is a book I read quite a while ago. It is all about city planning and the functions of cities in today's society. As a city dweller myself, I still think about a lot of the concepts that were discussed in this book. Like, for instance, he talks about the need to build upward, to design buildings that are taller, to lessen urban sprawl. It certainly gives you a lot to think about. I think it's a great read. Our second challenge, sport, I know is probably going to be the most intimidating of the 4 for a lot of participants. I myself am not the biggest sports lover, so this is the one that I'm getting the most creative with. Case in point, my first TBR selection for the sport challenge is And So We Read On, How the Great Gatsby Came to Be and Why It Endures by Maureen Corrigan. Why am I reading this nonfiction book for the challenge sport, you ask? Well, that's because the character of Jay Gatsby calls the character Nick Carraway old sport as a term of endearment. When I said you can get creative with these challenges, I meant it. This is a book all about the long-lasting impact of this particular American classic and why people keep connecting with it so strongly nearly 100 years after its publication. I personally really love nonfiction books that dive into a specific work of classic literature, and I have been meaning to read this one for a long time. My other interpretation of the sport challenge is just as liberal. So I'll be reading Kicks, The Great American Story of Sneakers by Nicholas Smith. Since sporting something can mean to wear something, I thought that would make a great excuse to pick up this cultural history of the athletic shoe commonly known as sneakers. I thought it was a nice double play since you sport these as you play a sport. I'm annoying, I know. My recommendations for sport are a little bit more literal, but have more to do with competition than anything else. So first off, allow me to suggest Rough Magic, Riding the World's Loneliest Horse Race by Laura Pryor Palmer. This is a fantastic memoir of the youngest and also first female competitor ever to win the Mongol Derby, which is known as the world's most challenging horse race. It takes place in Mongolia and aims to recreate Genghis Khan's postal system. The author decided on a whim to participate despite not having the same training or background as many of her fellow competitors, but several different factors, one of them definitely being luck, combined to see her take the top spot, and she writes about all of it very, very beautifully here. I wrote a full review of this one for Open Letters Review, which I will link for you down below if you'd like more information on this book. And then I just have to recommend Moonwalking with Einstein, The Art and Science of Remembering Everything by Joshua Foer. This is one of my very favorite nonfiction books. It is all about how journalist Joshua Foer first learns about and then becomes fascinated by competitive memorization champions. He begins using their techniques to train for a championship and then goes on to participate in a very prestigious one. Along the way, he discusses what memory is, where it resides in the brain, and why the technique used by these people actually works. It is a super engaging read and I love recommending it to people. So you see, the sport challenge doesn't have to be scary. If you're into sports, then by all means read a sports book. But if you're not into sports, then feel free to bend the challenge. Like Beckham. On to our much more straightforward challenge, True. I am planning on reading Bunk, The Rise of Hoaxes, Humbug, Plagiarists, Phonies, Postfacts, and Fake News by Kevin Young. I loved this book as a choice for the True Challenge because these are true stories of people being exposed as fakers. It relays all the facts on people being caught being deceitful. And the other book I'm planning on reading for the True Challenge is Imagined Life, a speculative scientific journey among the exoplanets in search of intelligent aliens, ice creatures, and supergravity animals by James Treffill and Michael Summers. This book imagines what life would look like on other planets should it really exist out there, but this is not science fiction. It uses real hard science to guide all the predictions that are discussed in this book. I find this endlessly fascinating. I'm really looking forward to going on that mental journey. My first recommendation for the True Challenge is Catch Me If You Can, The True Story of a Real Fake by Frank Abagnale, ghostwritten by Stan Redding. This is the memoir of an extremely successful con artist who committed his impersonation and forgery crimes back in the late 60s, early 70s. I like this book as a recommendation for the True Challenge because it's kind of meta. I am the type of nonfiction reader that just reading the book isn't enough for me. I also need to scour the internet and read anything I can find on that same subject. And after I read this book, I watched a lot of interviews with Frank Abagnale, who admitted that a lot of the things in this book were sensationalized. It makes for a great read and it has an amazing movie adaptation, but it certainly makes you flex some of those critical thinking, critical reading muscles, since you can't trust everything you read to be true. My other recommendation for True is meta in its own way as well. That book is called Savage Appetites: Four True Stories of Women, Crime, and Obsession by Rachel Monroe. I've spoken about this book quite a bit since I read it a few months ago. This book is an examination of why women are responding so intensely to crime stories lately. The author takes four archetypes of women within crime stories: the killer, the victim, the defender, and the detective, and gives true examples of women who identified with each of these roles. I found this book to be excellent and so thought-provoking, so much so that I not only did a full written review for Open Letters, but also did a full video discussion about the topics in this book. I will link both of those things for you down below in case you are interested in hearing more about it. And lastly, for the voice challenge, I'm going to be picking up The Good Neighbor, The Life and Work of Fred Rogers by Maxwell King. This is a biography of Fred Rogers, creator and host of the children's TV show Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He was also an advocate for the emotional education of children and just for being kind to one another in general. His voice and his message of love, patience, and acceptance of others was and continues to be extremely important. He was from the Pittsburgh area, and we very much like to claim him as our own. His voice was extremely important around the time of the Tree of Life synagogue shooting, and since we are coming up on the anniversary of that, it's going to be an extremely hard day around here. I would very much like to have this book to look forward to. On a lighter note, my last TBR book is Trick Mirror, Reflections on Self-Delusion by Gia Tolentino. This is an essay collection that discusses different aspects of our modern culture. I have heard absolutely everyone talking about this book, hence why I chose it for the Voice Challenge. My first of 2 recommendations for the Voice Challenge will be Voices in the Ocean, a journey into the wild and haunting world of Dolphins by Susan Casey. This is a natural history book all about dolphins. It discusses what amazingly intelligent creatures they are, but also how they are suffering right now. It can be a very difficult book to read at times, I will not lie to you, but it is absolutely illuminating. And my last recommendation in this video is going to be a little bit unorthodox, but that book is called Empty Mansions: The Mysterious Life of Udette Clark and the Spending of a Great American Fortune by Bill Dedman. This is the story of the daughter of one of America's titans of industry. She inherited a massive fortune and numerous properties after her father's death, and yet lived her final 20 years in a hospital room when she was in perfect health. In the book, the author digs into her history to try to figure out the story of her and her family, but why I'm recommending it for the Voice Challenge is that in the audiobook version of this book, you hear a recording of a phone conversation with the woman herself. You hear her voice. I know some people don't really listen to audiobooks, have never really gotten into them, but if you are looking to get into them, nonfiction is a great place to start. And this is a great example of a nonfiction audiobook having content that wouldn't be available in a physical copy. So those are my TBR books and my recommendations for our 4 Nonfiction November challenges. If you have your own TBR, please feel free to type it in the comment section below or leave a link to your TBR video. I'd also love to know what your recommendations for these 4 challenges are. Have you read any amazing nonfiction books that you think fit any or some of these challenges perfectly? If you have, please let me know in the comment section below, or you can come over to our Goodreads discussion board and let me know there, or both. I will put the link to our Goodreads page and to any other information you will need for Nonfiction November down in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.